That was a great start to the day. You know, as Katie said, I think there's aspects of that that really make me feel optimistic. And I think it starts in each of these cases with a very conscious focus on how do you design for units to be affordable. In this case, we're just designing out materials, making use of space. And I think the other thing that struck me was it was great to have this panel talk about solving the problem in different contexts. So we have rural areas, we have infill and urban areas, and we have Michael's firm is getting to the larger scale. And I think as we think about this problem, again, there's not going to be one solution. It's going to have to be a solution across different contexts. And so it's really exciting to see different ways in which design approaches can help address that. And I guess the other thing is that this panel already highlights just the ways in which all these issues are interconnected. And so clearly, I think, sad to learn that Brian's not having luck in Boston area because of the approval process. And so clearly the regulatory process, parking and other things matter. And with Andrew's project, you know, his first thought is how do we get the financing to work for these? So we can start with these really innovative ideas in one sector and they're going to bleed into others, which is a great segue to our second panel. I'm going to bring up the moderator for this panel, Frank Anton. Frank is a senior industry fellow at the Joint Center. We have two of our industry fellows here as moderators. The Joint Center has a group we call our Policy Advisory Board of companies in the housing sector that help support us and we engage with. Frank is one of the folks who's been long involved with that. We're really pleased to have him come and play this role with us. He's a Vice Chairman Emeritus of Hanley Wood, premier media, information, and marketing services company serving the residential and commercial design industry. He's an innovative thought leader, focused on creating ways that Hanley Wood can better serve the residential and commercial industry. He was the CEO. He was also the publisher of Builder Magazine. And Frank is one of the most creative thinkers in this space that I've met, so we're really pleased to have him with us here today. He's also a fellow Dartmouth alum, so I have to give a shout out to the big green here on the Crimson campus. As always, our friends back at Dartmouth will be pleased, Frank, that you've got the podium here at Dartmouth. So please come up and introduce the next panel for us.
You know, about once a week, my wife says to me, you're a cynic. And I always say to her, I am not a cynic, I'm a realist. And I'm going to insert some realism into what we're talking about today, I think. But first I want to ask you a question. Do you know who you are as a group? You're the converted. And the speakers are preaching to you. And that's great. That's great. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you understand my experience, it's really with the mainstream of the housing industry. And the mainstream of the housing industry is not converted. And you're fighting a guerrilla warfare, and the mainstream of the housing industry has massed armies with missiles and planes and tanks and automatic weapons, and the mainstream of the housing industry doesn't really care about this almost at all. Whether they should or not, I think they should, the industry should, but it doesn't. It doesn't. And the mainstream of the American population, I don't think, cares about it. An example. The American auto industry, they're not making Fiat 500s. Half the vehicles being sold right now are SUVs. Half of the vehicles sold to American consumers are SUVs. They're big. The analogy to the housing industry is that the median size of a single-family home today is 2,500 square feet. Not 160 square feet, not 500 square feet. It's 2,500 square feet. And the political pressure that this industry puts on Congress and local jurisdictions and states and zoning and all that good stuff. Well, think about the tax reform legislation that passed. The housing industry's main concern, there were two, that the mortgage interest deduction, which is now capped against $1 million of mortgage, they didn't want that to be reduced. So it was to $750,000. There aren't very many $750,000 mortgages in the United States, but that was what the housing, because builders make a ton of money when they sell a $750,000 house or $1 million house. They don't make very much money. Well, they would argue that they could make no money building a 500 square foot house. And they don't think about, the mainstream of the industry doesn't even think about rental housing. It thinks about for sale housing. I'm not a cynic. I'm just telling you the way it is. And that's the way it is. And I've been involved with Habitat for Humanity for a long time, and Millard Fuller, the founder of it, always said that we're going to solve the housing problems in the country one unit at a time. And that's great. But when tens of millions of people don't have adequate housing, okay, so subtract one from tens of millions, and you made somebody happy, but you didn't solve the problem for tens of millions of other people. And, okay, you can multiply 1 times 100 or 1,000, but what we've been talking about, you can't multiply 1 times 40 million and solve the problem. So there is a lot of work to do here, a lot of work to do here. And forget, if I just think about my, the world I live in, the world I live in, people go around bragging about owning houses in the most expensive housing markets in the United States. My wife and I just moved to New York, and they're very excited in New York because the price of housing is about luxury housing is about $4,000 a square foot. Like, wow, we have the highest price per square foot housing in the United States. Isn't that great? Isn't that great? I took a weekend trip to Palm Beach, and they're very disappointed there because their average price per square foot is only around $1,500 or $2,000 a square foot. So I'm not a cynic. But we're kind of operating in that world. And insofar as this mainstream industry talks about affordability, it's usually focused on why are millennials not buying first time, why are they not entering the first time buyer market? And the industry says to itself, well, we don't get it. And they cite statistics that are like kind of try to refute some of the stuff that Chris showed you. I mean, they say, among other things, that, let me just make sure I get these numbers right. In the last year, a house they defined, this is the National Association of Realtors, is suitable for first-time buyers. The price has gone up about 11% in the last 2 years. But the index that says, is that house affordable or not, has only declined from forget how they get to the index, but it's a completely bogus way. But they get to an index of 109 2 years ago to 106 today. So they're saying, housing's still about as affordable as it was. And the monthly payment for this first-time house, and they're assuming a buyer with about $45,000 worth of income, is only gone from, they say only gone from $846 to $951, $100 more. But no big deal, it's $100. It's $100. The income during that time has gone from $41,000 to $46,000. The government, now they assume things like these people can afford a 25% down payment, that they have high credit scores, they don't have student debt. So does the index mean much? Probably not, but the housing industry convinces itself that this means that the reason millennials don't buy houses is because millennials are lazy, disorganized. For some reason, they don't get married. If they get married, they don't have kids. They're not normal. They're not normal. That's why millennials don't buy a house. But the reality is they can't afford to buy a house. Now, I know that when we're talking about $45,000 income, that's much more than what's going on in Alabama or whatever. But that's the definition of a first-time buyer. The federal government has a housing affordability index. In the last 2 years, it's basically flat. It was at 170 2 years ago. It very briefly dropped to 150, but it's now at 165. So I'm not a cynic. But there needs to be a lot of stuff going on to change the dynamic that's in the mainstream of the housing industry. And part of that is what we're talking about today. It will make a difference, but it won't solve the problem quickly, and it won't solve easily. You're going to have 3 speakers: James Shen, number 1, Randy Miller, number 2, Fritz Wolf, number 2. I'm supposed to stop, and I will.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here. So I'm James. I run an office based in Beijing called People's Architecture Office with 2 other partners, Zhangfeng and He Zhe. So I'll be showing some things in a different part of the world, but I'll bring it back to home so that we can also try to connect different worlds here. I'm going to start with a prefabricated building system that we've been developing ourselves. Just explain a little bit about what that is. But I'd really like to bring in different dimensions to the issue of cost. And certainly the first, the beginning will be the economy of scale. And so, yes, mass production does allow you to lower costs, increase quality, all of those things that we're probably all pretty familiar with. But I think it also doesn't mean that everything needs to be the same. I think there's a lot of work to be done there. So what we've been developing is a panelized system. It's not concrete, steel, or wood. It's all insulation, pretty much. The core is polyurethane insulation. It's a sandwich panel with a exterior of steel, but that can be some other things. And the interior surface is a kind of drywall type material called MGO. So that's the fireproofing. So these are sandwiched together. It's an injection molded process. And the result is a panel that is structural, highly energy efficient. It's light. It can be shipped flat. One of the things that's really interesting about this is that we've also molded in these locks that allow you to lock these panels together very quickly. So that means you don't have you don't require skilled labor, and these houses can go up in a very short amount of time. This is me and my partner Zhangfeng. Putting one of these together, and you see the panels are quite light. You can integrate all kinds of things such as electrical. And the speed of the process is quite important if you're talking about the kind of housing you're developing, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. This is the factory, and as you can see, the panels we do have panels that are fairly standard, and we have ones that are different. So the way we do that is we have a mold that is adjustable. So these molds can be changed according to the needs of the people that we're building for. And so we can do this in a way that is still economical. It doesn't increase costs very much, and still be able to provide for designs that fit unique situations. And we've found that every situation has been unique. I'd like to move into also the economy of location. That where we build things matter a lot. In terms of cost. I know that's obvious, but how do you go about that? How do we deal with that? So our work started in these historic areas in Beijing, in one neighborhood in particular called Dashilar. And this is a very interesting situation because this is one of the most expensive cities to live in the world. It's also one of the most central locations that you can find in Beijing. It's right next to Tiananmen Square in the Forbidden City. And surprisingly, you have a large number of these houses that are vacant. The reason for that is this is a historic area. It has slum-like conditions, and there's been a lot of disinvestment, flight, and so forth. These are all centuries-old buildings that are degrading. And we wanted to come up with an alternative to the typical kind of urban renewal that you would find. So we came up with an approach to say that you don't need to relocate people, you don't need to tear anything down, and that you could build a house inside a house. And so this is an illustration of how we do that. So we keep all the original structures as they are, and you can think of it as a method of retrofitting, upgrading, or infill. And you can see here, this is some of the results. And these are before and after images. So through this process, we began thinking about cities that just continually expand outwards, moving towards following cheap land, and understanding that cities just can't continue to do that, and we have to find other ways of building, perhaps building inwards. Here you can see an example of this. This is actually not in a historic area. This is in a urban village. So these are. This is actually rural land that's been surrounded by the expansion of the city. But similar conditions where properties that have been abandoned and very complex issues with property and land rights that prevent a lot of development and adaptive reuse, and we try to skirt around some of these issues through this approach. And so this idea of developing in places where people already live, are already there, means that you also take advantage of existing communities, community networks, infrastructure, social services, and you can imagine how difficult it is, the costs that you would have to come up with to bring all of that to these locations that are further out of the city. So in fact, what I'm trying to say is that we can't think about housing as, the cost of housing as just materials and technology and design, but also all those other things around it. And think a little bit more long term, but still think of it as something that we can engage in as designers and builders and policymakers. We've also built these extensions, additions, and you see that we're really learning from the people around us. All around, all of that stuff is, those are all additions, informal additions. And the funny shape that we have, that's actually has nothing to do with building regulation, but more about navigating the dynamics between the neighbors. They said, well, don't block my light here, don't block my air, and that's the design, really. And so these become also projects that are negotiating very complex social dynamics, social relationships in these locations. Here we're building on top of buildings. This is actually all rental housing. I think that's also an important issue that we want to engage in. And we've also been building in rural areas. This is the countryside. This is for a farmer. But I'd like to get to something that I think is closer to our situation here is accessory dwelling units. This is what we're interested in the U.S. And we think that this is something that could be applicable to the States. The idea of accessory dwelling units is basically that homeowners can build a house in the backyard. and that the city would open up this regulation and give incentives for homeowners to do this. Cities without land, without funding, would be able to rely on private homeowners. And the rental units, well, these would only be rental units, but they would provide secondary income. The hope is that you would have more inclusive neighborhoods, lower-income people that could move in. And it would be sort of a counter to this sort of NIMBYism that we find a lot. Fortunately, it's been it's been very successful in many cities across the U.S., so this could be a very exciting area. The last thing I'd like to touch on is the importance of people. There's so much value captured in the communities that we try to engage in, and so often we don't extract that knowledge. So part of the way we do that is we started off. We actually didn't start off with the product. We moved into this neighborhood without having any idea how to deal with the issues that we didn't understand the issues. So we moved into this neighborhood, and it was a way for us to engage with locals. But we also used our system for our own office, for redesigning or designing our office. So this was also a courtyard house. This is not all ours. We share this with other locals. And through this process, we've also engaged with lots of people around us. They become our clients directly, some before and after images. And you can see that the relocation process is not such a big deal, or the upgrading process is not such a big deal, because they can basically move the furniture out for a little bit. We do this for a day or two, and then they move stuff back in. These are very small. They're about 250 square feet, 300 square feet. But through this process, we've really learned a lot, and the design has continued to change and adjust as we've gone along this process. The last thing is we're working with the city here on a couple of demonstration units to bring this process of engaging with people to the States. So we're working with the Housing Innovation Lab out of the Mayor's office, and we'll be building a plug-in house at City Hall. This will be there on May 4th. We'll be there for a couple weeks, and we'll have all kinds of activities and events around that. And it's going to be also at Harvard Yard here, actually earlier. It's going to be here on April 26th, and they'll be here for about a week. And we'll be doing the same thing, is to engage people with some of the issues surrounding housing. Thank you.
So where I'm from, and all over the US, millions and millions of people live in suburbs and drive hours a day, sometimes even 100 miles in total, to get to central business districts where they make their livelihood or they go to school. I'm one of these people, and the reason for this, and for many people, but not all, is because they can't afford to live near the center of cities where their work is and where universities are. And so why is that? A big reason is because of the cost of housing, and a major part of the cost of housing is the cost of construction. And so why is the cost of construction so large and so out of control? Well, one reason is because in 100 years, not a whole lot has changed. And so if we look at the Salesforce Tower, recently completed in San Francisco, and compare that to the Empire State Building, and just change one thing, put the photograph in black and white, you really can't place the time frame, even though 100 years separates almost 100 years separates the construction of these two buildings. But it gets worse, because the fact is the Empire State Building is a third larger than the Salesforce Tower and was built in 13 months, while the Salesforce Tower took 5 years to complete. Now, contrast that with just about every other production-based industry, where over the same time period, we've seen 2x, 3x, 4x, 5x productivity gains, but we haven't seen that in construction. My name is Randy Miller. My company is RAD Urban, and our mission is to deliver transformative construction solutions to fulfill our vision of better cities, and our goal is to be able to build a 40-story residential high-rise and do it in 12 months and do it at half the cost of today's standard construction. Now, people look at me like I'm insane when I say that, and we're not there today, but we're well on the way, and I'm not a cynic. I'm an optimist and a realist, and I am 100% confident that it is achievable. And it's more a question of execution at this point than even technology. If we can do that, if we can build a 40-story tower at half the cost of conventional construction, then we can place our costs at less than the cost of suburban multifamily construction, and we can reverse the pressure on cities to sprawl out for miles and miles and miles and create pressure to build up our urban cores. So how do we do this? So our thesis is that we need to rely on a manufacturing basis of construction and on housing delivery. So this is our factory in the California Central Valley, and our workers are not local to the Bay Area, but the fact is, if our workers weren't working here, they would be driving 2 hours each way to work in Berkeley and San Francisco and Oakland, because they are trade workers, but they can't afford to live in the construction markets that they serve. They can't afford to live near our factory. And so you can see it's an assembly line. And what we're trying to create here that has evaded the construction industry is that Model T moving assembly line moment when automobile manufacturing achieved almost a 90% productivity improvement very, very quickly. And to the question of, well, what is left for the local workers and the local subcontractors, I'll remind people that the introduction of the moving assembly line was not the end of the automotive workforce, it was the beginning, and created an explosion in manufacturing employment that lasted for many, many decades and supported millions of families for a long time. You'll also notice that our factory, the modules are steel. They have a structural steel chassis, but we are using light frame metal stud framing. That's a function of current building codes and historic practices, but that is not the way forward. One of the things that a manufacturing basis for construction allows is we can move away from legacy materials that were based on what a construction worker could carry up a ladder or a stair or a scaffold, and we can move to larger, more efficient panelized assemblies like what James is producing, but even larger, things that you can only achieve in a factory. So these are some examples of our pre-finished volumetric modules going into a project in Berkeley. And I've got a few more pictures of projects later. We've now completed 3 projects. We have 2 projects underway, and our first tower's approved, and we're hoping to break ground before the end of the year. Now, we need to marry the manufacturing process to an end-to-end project delivery scheme, and that includes design and engineering. And so one of the advantages of modular construction is, as a manufacturer, we have a bill of materials, and that bill of materials is connected to a supply chain and suppliers and prices attached to each line item in that bill of materials. And when we take a module and change it, we know how the cost changes instantly. And so as an architect or a designer or a developer, we can now actually design right to a budget. And so as we pull modules from a catalog into a massing model, we can instantly see what we're doing to the cost of the building. Similarly, we can standardize the structural assemblies. We don't need 100 or 1,000 different building cores. We can have some standardized core assemblies. And then we can apply site-specific forces to them. That's the Loma Prieta earthquake. And then we can apply the member sizing to the standardized configuration and go into manufacturing. Now, we also have to think about what we do at the job site. And we need to extend the manufacturing ideology to how we build on site, moving away from the notion that, oh, construction is risky, so as a general contractor, I'm going to be a broker and subcontract away all my risk. And I think Fritz will probably speak to this even more, but our perspective is to manage the job site as an extension of the manufacturing process, where we manage a supply chain outside the gates of the job site, and then on the job site, we have receiving, material handling, and installation. And those are all different activities performed by different crews. In a factory, you would never take a production worker away from his station to go unload a truck. But on a high-rise, that's exactly what happens, only the crew's coming down in a material lift from 30 stories up. So where are we today? So that's our pilot project, the 6137 MacArthur, a little 5-unit project to make sure that we could engineer modules, we could manufacture them, we could stack them, that we could rent the building, that we could sell the building, and that we could make money. We lost $1 million. But we saw that it would work at scale. The next project was a student housing project at UC Berkeley, and this was a success. We achieved a substantial savings. We've now completed 3 projects, and like I said, 2 projects are underway, including 5110 Telegraph, and Franklin is our first tower. So you can see our cost on the first one was almost double market cost. But now we're achieving 20 to even 30% savings over conventional construction. And notably, we've gotten to the point where our budget for our first tower is consistent with the market cost for a low-rise building in the same market. Now remember, our goal is to build that tower at a cost that's less than the cost of a low-rise building in the suburbs. And we're not there yet, but that's where we're heading. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. There's so much good work that's been done up here. I don't know if I have much left to say. Typically, I would start, see if I get this cue to work. Typically, I'd start by walking through this slide deck, but given the context of the discussion that's been had to date, I'm not even certain that I'm going to get to it. The reality is that this business, from my perspective, and I started this with 2 other partners, was a manifestation to help solve the acute social crisis that we've all been here talking about, the problems that surround us. And I think it's probably more contextually helpful for me to start around that journey for a few minutes and talk to you about how that journey led us to this pathway to better, faster, cheaper construction to help unearth and curb the social crisis that exists in essential housing today. So first, thanks for the preamble that Chris and Kathleen and Frank, you guys gave that helped shave, would be a 20-minute discussion into 8 or 9. So I've had a front row seat to the social housing crisis for the last 20 or 25 years, being a market participant as an investment manager, a developer, and a financier of other people's projects. And I own that investment management business with 2 other partners, which otherwise wouldn't be worth mentioning, but today it will because it intersects what became this business, Katera. One is a guy by the name of Jim Davidson, who co-founded a technology buyout business called Silver Lake Partners, which has focused for the last 20 years on trying to find technology industries where there are technologies that are under-optimized and figure out strategies to help unearth and increase productivity in those industries. And another is a gentleman by the name of Michael Marks, who did the same thing in the ODM business, making things like these computers and cell phones, with a business called Flextronics, and his rival competitor, a guy by the name of Terry Goh at Foxconn. So I sat down with Jim and Michael about 5 years ago and said, riddle me this. We've had negative productivity gains for the last 40 years in construction. You literally pay more and get less every year than you did last year, the year before. And the competitive response from the industry is either smaller assets, older housing stock, or people that go without, and it's a growing problem. So just from a procurement exercise, just a supply chain exercise, tell me this. If I were to commit to 100,000 toilets, 100,000 rooftops, you've all heard the story, how far could we bend the cost curve just using traditional methods as a supply chain exercise? And what we ultimately came to was, let's back up and talk about all the lessons that have been learned in consumer electronics manufacturing, all of them over the last 30 years. And where there are mistakes, throw them out. Where they're not applicable to construction, throw them out. Where they're applicable, let's fast forward and not relearn those mistakes and see if we can apply them to the construction industry. Where we ultimately landed was that we believe fundamentally, and it may be provocative in this room, that the classic hub and spoke system of owner, architect, contract, general contractors, and subcontractors are broken. The whole concept's broken. So general contractors, go away. Subcontractors, go away. Architects, engineers, how they interact today, go away. And a proxy for that is, if you look at the cell phone that I don't have in my pocket, in $1980 today, if you were to look at those productivity gains of a cell phone, it would cost us roughly $750,000 to buy an Apple iPhone today, using the same productivity gains of negative 1% a year that it takes us to build a building. That doesn't seem that logical. So one of the lessons learned in consumer electronics that have deeply bent the cost curve and the time curve was you have to own everything. And when we mean everything, when Michael left Flex, 400,000 employees, Terry has 1.5 million employees, there are no subcontractors, there are no handoffs, period, end of story. You have to be one solution from absolutely end to end, from materials cost to the delivery of the site. Ambitious and crazy, I know, but that's what we thought it would take if we were actually going to deliver a problem at scale, and we were willing to burn our own boats at the beach as a market participant to try. So let me see if I can move my way through a couple of slides. So the business we have is called Katera. You'll see a lot of analogs to RAD, the great presentation we just saw, other than we started in low and mid-rise applications versus high-rise applications, just because that's where the launch customer ourselves came from. So that's where we had to learn our lessons in construction. So what do? We do architecture, interior design, engineering, manufacturing, building, general contracting, skilled labor, renovations, and it includes subcontracting. So we're all the final field labor as well. Here we are today. We're adding between 500 and 1,000 people a month as a global team. It comes from manufacturing, design, construction, supply chain, software engineering. Of the executive team, of the core executive team, one comes from construction, and I feel sorry for him every day, but we give him all the support possible. But this is the background of where the groups come from as we think about how do we really innovate and have a clean sheet of paper of thinking about driving down cost. So we have global procurement and supply chain. So everything that goes into a building, we either physically make or buy, manufacture direct over multi-year global supply chain agreements. We designed to that supply chain, as you saw in the RAD example. Actually, we designed our supply chain and auto price through a computer system that break that down into manufacturing and then treat the job site as an extension of the factory, which is an assembly site, not a construction site. Where are we today? So as of today, we have about 4,000 units underway. We will deliver about just under 9,000 units this year, about 115 projects underway. About a third of those are our own principally, and the others are other large-scale developers who are committing either a large scale or a significant amount of their pipeline. And that represents about 20,000 units that will be delivered next year. I will tell you that one of the big frustrations I've had with the industry is watching 90% of the capital flows and 90% of the supply go to the top decile of the affluence pyramid, because it takes that amount of rent to mask the dysfunction in construction. So we're heavily focused on prioritizing our own market participation and others' market participation where we can bend the cost curve and socialize those gains with a for-profit economic model into the pockets of residents, which today is less than 5% of the supply being delivered to the country. We have one factory underway that's up and operating in Phoenix. We have 4 more that'll be completed by the end of 19 that are committed to. So we have the U.S. covered from a minimum efficient scale standpoint. Here's the jobs that we have underway and pending projects. And I've only got a couple minutes, so I'll move through this fast. I think we've already been through this. We have an end-to-end ERP system, which we're told by SAP we're one or two of the country, which so that means we know where every last stitch of material is from when it gets pulled out of the forest to when it hands to the job site with no handoffs in between, which is standard protocol in most industrialized businesses, but in construction it seems to be novel. Auto design and pricing, we walked through that. One other item that I think is of note coming from the construction industry, coming from the consumer electronics industry in a lot of the executive team, is the cost of not to use brand names, but the cost of designing in the Crustrons and Lutrons and Nests of the world, doing that at the materials level and not at the brand level. The cost that would be $8,000, $10,000, $12,000 a unit, we think is generally free, if not less than free at a materials cost level. And so that's something that if you treat this as a manufacturing and engineering problem, not as an architecture and component problem, there's great opportunities too. We have a consortium of architects, obviously, lots of the connotations of prefabrication, modular that come from the industry. Think that of standardization, lack of quality. So we have a consortium of great third-party architects that we work with that help work on design. One other thing, when we say we make a lot of the components, we not only make components, but from an ergonomic standpoint, we think about putting everything from the appliances that we either make or design and have from a supply chain standpoint down to the radios on the wall, having the same consistent patterns and themes like you would see the stitching of a car put together, other than one brand of appliance and another brand of another component in the home. Design variations, this is just the ability to deliver different designs with the same basic architecture. Sustainability is a huge issue for us. Somebody mentioned in the last panel CLT, which I'll go to in a moment. I'm actually going to skip through, in the interest of I've only got 1 minute left, I'm going to skip through a video we don't need to see. But for us, it's the same concept of drive half the time, half the cost, half of the variable OpEx out of buildings by being absolutely everything from the supply chain to the finished delivery site, and also do so in a very sustainable way and do so in a way that we think we will drive the long-term optimization of buildings to a better place than how we've seen the footprint over the last 100 years. To that end, I know I've got 1 minute left that says stop. We're underway on the largest US CLT factory, cross-laminated timber factory in the Americas. That'll be up and operating in November. 5% of the global CO2 emissions come from concrete. We think we would like to minimize it where possible. We think this is a better, faster, cheaper, and prettier solution. And we're hoping it's applicable to all the rest of the development community that's in the room and elsewhere. And this is one way where we hope we can collaborate on high-rise to build much better, faster, cheaper, that will help aid and abet the modular designs of the world. So that's it.
Okay, we're going to have, again, a discussion period, but keep it to like 5 to 7 minutes because I talked too long at the beginning. A couple things that I think you should probably think about is how do we scale, like all this stuff is, like I said, happening on a guerrilla level. So how do you scale this so that you really, instead of producing hundreds of units, you're producing hundreds of thousands of units this way? Hundreds of thousands, and really dramatically change the equation about the way housing is being provided to people and make that housing significantly less expensive. We're going to ask you, just as we did after the first panel, to answer 4 questions. And what are the things that you think are making it so difficult, seemingly so difficult to really make housing more affordable? So once you answer the question, speak to your table mates or seat mates, and we'll be back in action here to have a discussion with the panelists in about 7 minutes. It sounds like the presentations engendered a lot of questions and comments and discussion. Jeez. Okay.
You want to walk to the podium?
Shh. Stop talking. Okay. How's that? Yeah. Well, I mean, it's good that you're talking because that, I think, means that these presentations got you interested and excited. But we want to have time for you to ask some questions. The question that we asked, that there's really clearly no consensus that there's some single factor that's outweighing the others. They all seem to contribute in almost an equal way to the problem of providing more affordable housing. So we're going to now open it up to questions. I want to ask the 3 of you. I have an idea that the way the home building industry is now, that builders, there's 50,000 builders out there all doing the same thing, collecting materials and putting them together and then trying to sell or rent the property. And imagine if that was the way the auto industry worked, that there were 50,000 people. And 120 years ago, there were hundreds of auto manufacturers. Then eventually there became 3, and they provided dealers with cars. And I have a notion that, all 3 of you are talking about manufacturing housing in a way. Can you see the same thing happening to housing? That there are 6 or 7 or 4 manufacturers who have plants all across the country, and that there are dealers, builder dealers in effect, using your product. And do you see an upside to that?
I can speak to that. I think the construction market is hugely fragmented, and the construction market is one of these strange markets where there tends to be diseconomies of scale. The guy working out of a pickup truck has the biggest margin, and as soon as he hires someone, he cuts his margin in half. When he gets an office, his margin is further reduced, and by the time he's Turner Construction, he's down to working for 1%. When you introduce a manufacturing basis of construction, all of a sudden there are economies of scale. And the larger you are, the more efficient you can be. And I think Katerra is going after that aggressively. But I think that there will be consolidation in the construction industry, and that it's a natural process of an industry maturing, where you go from hundreds or thousands or millions of players, and in construction the top 400 general contractors have 27% of the market. And I expect that over the next 20, 30 years, I think we'll get to a place where 10 or 20 major technology manufacturing-based construction firms will end up with 80% of the market. And we could debate whether that's good or bad, but I do believe it'll bring efficiency.
So I echo the sentiment, which is, give you just 2 data points, right? There's 750,000 construction companies in the United States, and 745,000 of them have less than 10 employees. That in and of itself tells you there's no room and latitude for innovation unless there is some consolidation. And so by definition, if we're going to innovate, there has to be some consolidation, and the pathway of supply chain manufacturing and assembly has been the proven path in almost every other industry, and it's not logical why this wouldn't be the same one.
Well, I'm actually trained as I'm trained as a product designer as well as an architect. So I think this discussion about bringing architecture into the era of mass production is definitely important. But I think architecture is also very different from other fields, different from furniture, from our computers, is that we have to deal with a site, a location, and the communities that are there. So I think I don't know if that's necessarily where we're gonna go. Is a few manufacturers and product that is all very similar. Standardized. I don't think the manufacturing for products themselves are going to go in that direction. There's something called mass customization that's interesting. Doesn't exactly exist yet. But I'm also interested in ideas of incremental development, meaning you build as you need it. You build according to the resources that you have, and you have to change and adapt to the city, to the environment. I think those are things that we're going to have. We have to deal with the building industry as well.
Questions from the audience? Kent?
Yes, I've talked to...
Kent, let her give you the microphone.
Yeah, the question is, of the 1.2 million houses that were built, single family and multifamily in the United States, 30% of them were multifamily, 70% were single family. What in Katerra, I was fortunate enough to ask, you're basically building towers, Brian. Are you doing any single family, or are they all multifamily structures?
So today, I mean, over time, we intend to have every application of the construction industry. Today, it's high-density residential, and high-density residential is the adjacencies of residential. So senior housing, student housing, multifamily, hotels, anything with a kitchen and a bathroom that is non-high-rise. We're starting to deliver into high-rise now, but of the first 10 or 20,000 units, what we'd call beta units, the first 50 or 60 projects you saw, very few of those are high-rise. Most of those are traditional, institutional, multifamily or senior housing assets that deliver into the workforce.
So sort of relating your conversation to Frank's introduction, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, Frank, but much of what he was talking about wasn't on the multifamily side. It was the single family side, the houses that are being built around the country. Are you in Katerra thinking at all about, because that's really where the dinosaurs are.
Yeah, so
in terms of really getting into that, and that's where if you can bring a 30% cost reduction and build houses that people will buy, I think there's a great market. You can disrupt the housing market in the United States.
So the short answer is, this was just a progression of this is a young business. We've been at the Katerra business, notwithstanding we have close to 100 projects underway. It's only 3 years old, but it acquired lots of principal activity we were doing, and that happened to be that principal activity. So those are the skills that they honed first. And once they did those, unpacking it into single family is a less complicated problem in our view.
The one thing you will have to add to it that gets more, it will be land purchase and land development and all the subdivision kind of things in terms of doing that, which they're very good at.
That's right. To be clear, Katerra is a services business.
Right.
And in consumer electronics analog, it's the Intel inside. We're not intending to be the out-facing customer. We're trying to enable that. So the public and private home builders of the world will still have their place to organize land, entitle land, complete horizontal infrastructure, maybe that's us, maybe that's them, and be marketing and delivery ventricles to their customers. We just intend to be a one-stop solution provider for everything in between.
Right.
I just want to say that I have the view that solving housing affordability and also environmental sustainability, I think it's going to happen on the multifamily side. And there's, a lot of people would be happy to live in a less expensive single-family home. I just don't see that as where the general solution to housing affordability and sustainability is going to come from.
Question back there.
Hi. From what I understand, prefabricated housing and modular housing has been a thing since the 1890s, when you could buy a flat pack house from the Sears catalog. And so why do you think it's just taken over almost 130 years to get to this point where we're talking about it in a more serious way than we have in the past?
Well,
I'll let you take that one.
I guess so. I would answer it. I would answer it in two ways, which is one, I think that there's a social fabric that's become a tipping point that wasn't a tipping point because of urbanization trends and demography over the last number of decades. That has been the case, and the other is that the development and construction community has been able to get away with pro-cyclical behavior and lack of innovation until it hasn't, and now that it's hit a tipping point. I guess that's the answer. That's it. The quick answer I would give.
what a lot of builders would say is if you manufacture housing, the industry's cyclical. You have a big factory that costs millions and millions of dollars or tens of millions of dollars, and then this is a big country. It's not Denmark where you can service the whole country out of one factory. You have to build factories all over the country. If there's a downturn, housing starts to decline by 60%. That factory, you're dead. You're dead. I'm not saying that we've talked about that. You don't agree that that's the case, but the housing industry has felt that way for a long, long time. So that's another reason. Another reason is that local communities resist manufactured housing. And consumers associate manufactured housing with mobile homes up on concrete blocks. And so in a lot of places, even if you have a beautiful unit, and these units that you saw are pretty handsome, you're going to get incredible resistance from local communities. So there's a whole bunch of reasons that manufactured housing or factory-built housing or whatever you want to call it didn't catch on the way people thought it would after World War II. Yes?
How much do regional, thank you, factors play into the models that you deploy? I mean, certain weather and, a lot of what we heard on the design panel was about how labor specific or the distance at which you can ship things, and then also on the other side that ceiling heights that have been used in certain regions for a long time are there because it responds to the heat or the cold. I'm just curious how this model gets deployed on a more regional basis.
Well, I want to combine this with the previous question. Is actually prefab has been around for much longer than the Sears houses. And I think part of the issue is the sameness and regional concerns are very important if you're going to talk about sustainability. But there are also a lot of cultural and social issues. I think this is a social problem, and we need a social solution. I don't think that. I think technology can support that, but as I think we were all talking about here, one thing is density. I think the future of housing does have to be multifamily, higher density, multi-stories. That's a social issue. I think the materials that we use, you were talking about electrical conduit and so on. Those are social issues. It's not a problem of the technology. And I think hopefully designers, engineers, we can work much closer with policymakers, regulators to push these changes.
I think regional issues matter, but that the regional markets are large and diverse enough that they can be serviced well on a manufactured basis. I also think it's definitely easier to operate within your region than to go across states. If you're focused on a particular area, even a municipality, many of the people here know this. If you know your planning department, it makes a big difference in getting projects approved as opposed to showing up for the first time in a new town. So those are all things that have to be addressed.
There's a question over here.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very interesting discussions. I think part of this is that the whole system we're working in is a complex socio-technical system where you have institutions, technologies, and actors trying to make the system work together, but the regulatory system is dysfunctional, the construction system is dysfunctional, so having the technology alone isn't going to help. I mean, you can look at a country like Singapore that's already building 40-story modular residential buildings because they can very well control the regulatory environment, the construction environment, and everything else. How do you actually expect to be able to make progress in a country with 30,000 different jurisdictions, with groups called fire departments that are really concerned about the fire performance of modular construction in the past, and the labor issues that came forward? The supply chain technology part seems pretty easy. Everything else seems to be the big challenges.
Good question.
I think supply chain is also very, very complicated and very difficult. One thing I'd like to propose is when people, I'm an architect. I'm not a policymaker, but my understanding is policy is made based on data research, things that have existed in the past and current situations. But as a designer, we're thinking of what's possible, and it's important if you're making decisions like policy that you can consider possibilities. And I think there's a disconnectedness between all these different silos, all these different fields. And hopefully there's a way that we can have a more productive conversation around this. And I think part of that is through demonstrating some of these ideas, to put them into neighborhoods and to build them. It's very difficult to build a tower. So that's actually why we've been building these very small houses, to introduce some of these ideas and technologies. In fact, we are also building multi-story versions of this, but it's just a lot more difficult. So I think smallness is not just a good direction forward for communities, but it's also a great way to test things out, experiment, and to interact.
They don't have red stop signs here. They have white stop signs, but it's still a stop sign. So we've been asked to stop, and we will. Thank you very much.
Is this on? We're trying to pack a lot into this today, and so we are running behind. I do want to give people a chance to get a cup of coffee. Two quick observations. One is I just want to echo what James was saying about housing being social. And it's social in how we live in it and social in how we produce it. And so I think the challenge here is bringing scale and linking it to something that's also works at a social level. And so, I think Andrew's problem of trying to bring scale to what he's doing, but very much can be based at a community level, both in terms of the people living in it and how it's produced. And so I think a lot of the challenge here is bringing scale and retaining community and retaining some design that's sensitive to the site and the community around it. The social piece is also important for the next panel, which is this is a social problem and how we get things approved. And so I think that aspect we'll talk about when we come back from the break about regulation. And one last thing, Fritz kind of slipped in there, this notion is that if we get scale on these production methodologies, but they're not socialized, they can be absorbed and just turn into higher profits. And so how do we bring this scale in a way that means that the profits, they don't get absorbed in profits, they get passed down to the consumer? Something to think about. 10-minute break. We'll come back at 4 o'clock. Thanks very much.